I do want to start by acknowledging the success that the disability rights movement have had in popularising that slogan, because it is now a slogan that is in many of our minds, but it is also a slogan that has a long and global history, because it expresses a fundamental principle, I think, that applies to all of us. Decisions which affect our lives cannot, should not, must not, be made without our input and involvement. It's just basic, and it's something so obvious that it feels really shocking to have to say that in 2019. And yet here we are. How have we come to a situation where women are denied the right to define the words that describe them and their oppression? How have we come to a situation where women are told the rights they have fought for and won are now going to get changed without their say-so? And how have we come to a situation where organising to challenge these changes is subject to fascist-like intimidation and harassment? Nothing about us without us. So who is the us? So for Women's Place UK, as you probably already gathered, the us is women, that's adult human females. Women whose sex-based rights have been established in law and yet now find that these rights are being undermined by people meddling with a definition determined by biological reality that has been socially agreed and understood for millennia. Feminists are routinely accused of biological essentialism, but we are not the ones who are reducing women to vagina havers, cervix owners, menstruators, or bleeders, all utterly reductive and offensive terms. Erasing the word woman and reducing us to a series of disjointed biological functions actually dissects the wholeness of our being. It denies the material reality of our existence, of our lives, and it dismisses the oppression we face. It denies our right to collective determination and organisation. The rights we have are only ours because we have fought our corner. Our four-sisters hacked out this space for us in the face of huge hostility and intimidation and opposition, as Ruth has already talked about. I tell you, we have no intention of giving those rights up. But more than that, we have come to realise actually how flimsy and limited those rights are. Not only will we defend our corner, but we will fight for more because frankly what we've got isn't enough. I'm going to go through a few things just to remind you of how bad things are actually for women. We've got endemic levels of sexual harassment, abuse and violence. Plan UK's survey showed that street harassment for 18 to 24-year-olds, 84% of 18 to 24-year-old women say it's a routine part of their life. Various surveys by the National Education Union, End Violence Against Women, Feminist the UK, Girl Guiding show that sexual harassment and abuse of girls in school is endemic. We've heard about the high levels of domestic violence from Karen. The failure of the criminal justice system, fewer than 6% of reported rapes result in convictions. What about the unreported rapes? I mean, that is an absolutely shocking statistic. We have failed to prevent or stem domestic violence. We have failed to protect women and children. We have situations where groups like Centre for Women's Justice have to go to the Supreme Court to get a judge to tell the police to investigate crimes against women properly. We've got persistent economic inequality. The pay gap is increasing again. Women still work largely in very poorly paid fields, the 5 Cs, clerical, catering, cashiering, cleaning and caring. 54 women lose their jobs every year because of pregnancy or maternity discrimination. 54,000 women every year in this country lose their jobs because of that. And we know that women are hardest hit by austerity. We had the UN rapporteur over here saying that the welfare system in this country was so sexist it might as well have been compiled, and he quote, this is a quote, by a group of misogynists in a room. Yeah, actually. We didn't need the UN rapporteur to come over and tell us that. And we know that from research done by the Women's Budget Group that actually it's poor, black, working class women who are the hardest hit most of all. We have inadequate representation, lack of women in politics, in commerce, in culture, in justice, in academia, in science and technology. We have a lack of representation in leadership and in positions of agency. We have attacks on the trade unions and collective organising, which is something that women have benefited from over the decades. And we have retrograde cultural attitudes. So we've got this resurgence of stereotypes and this new belief in pink brains and blue brains. The constant judgment of women and women's behaviour, the demonisation and sexual objectification of women, and the treatment of women in public discourse. On mainstream and social media, you only have to look at the way Diane Abbott is treated to know what I'm talking about. So for all of those things that I've mentioned, that experience is exacerbated by class, by race, and by things like disability. And yet the development and implementation of policies without involving women is rife. So I'm just going to run through a few of the things that I think are really an example of how failing to involve women has led us to where we are. We've got a move by stealth to mixed-sex wards, despite the NHS having an obligation to provide single-sex facilities. The conversion of single-sex toilets in schools and public places. Councils and organisations just substituting gender for sex because they feel like it and it sounds better, and therefore obstructing women from their sex-based legal rights. Leisure centres moving to mixed-sex changing rooms with no thought of the rights and wishes of women who, for reasons of privacy or dignity or trauma or safeguarding or faith, might actually want to access single-sex services. Completely inadequate response to sexual assault survivors from the police, the criminal justice system and the healthcare, so that you've got campaigners like Jessica Eaton, who now says she doesn't advise sexual assault survivors to go to the police because she thinks that actually what happens to them when they do is it just exacerbates the situation. We have the under provision and underfunding of the Women's Sector Service, as you heard, and we've got a government that thinks the best way to fund those services is by a tampon tax or through the lottery. We've got the erasure of lesbians, their identity and their boundaries, including from organisations that pretend to represent them. You should see Michael Biggs' analysis of Stonewall, GLAD, Human Rights Centre. The word lesbian doesn't exist as far as those organisations are concerned. The opening of all women's shortlists to self-identifying women, instead of actually coming up with mechanisms to deal with that underrepresentation separately. And the reliance on token female representation and the lack of diversity so that women of colour, women of faith, disabled women, poor women, young women, old women are excluded and ignored from decision making. And of course, how can we forget the failure of the Women and Equalities Committee to call any women's representatives to give evidence in person to the transgender inquiry, or even address the concerns that were made by women in written submissions. The debate around the GRA proposals actually exposed some really ugly truths about the world in which we live. I'll share them with you. Women are allowed to have opinions as long as they are the right ones. Women are allowed to have rights as long as they don't exercise them. And women who step out of line will be put back in place. Well, we are not prepared to tolerate that. When we started Women's Place, we thought we were just clearing a space for women to be heard, staking a claim for women in the debate. For this, we have experienced, quite frankly, a vile and abusive backlash. But actually, as women, we are used to this treatment and we refuse to be intimidated by it. A failure to consult and involve people in decisions is a clear signal that you think those people don't matter. Well, women do matter, and we intend to make that mean something. So, a failure to consult, oh, I've said that. We want women represented at every level of every organisation and political party. We want the views of self-organising women's groups to be sought and incorporated into any policy development. We want organisations to actively involve the widest range of women in developing their policies so that they are representative and responsive to the needs of all women. And we want organisations to review their equality policies to ensure they are compliant with legal obligations. And we will call out anyone who claims to know what women want if they cannot show they are basing this on the widest possible survey of the women they claim to represent, because anything else is unacceptable. Women make up half the world. It's about time we had our fair share of it.